The first thing that comes to mind when thinking about the Imperial military is no doubt the white-armored Imperial Stormtroopers of the Stormtrooper Corps, the Emperor's elite vanguard troops as well as potent symbols of his galaxy-spanning authority. Let's talk about them.
Sukui Garnervon. I am Tad Larkin, the lore master of Manda-LORE, and today I'll be digging through the archives to bring you organizational data and the history of the Stormtrooper Corps.
The mere sight of Imperial stormtroopers on patrol was usually enough to send smugglers packing and rebel sympathizers back into their hideouts, but just how did this come to be the case? Where did they earn this fearsome reputation? How were they organized? How were they armed? And where did they come from? If you've watched any of my other transmissions on the Imperial Army and the Imperial Navy, you are probably more than familiar with the concept that most of, if not all of, the Empire's civil and military institutions originated from that of the Old Republic which it replaced. And that goes the same for the Stormtrooper Corps, as the first Stormtroopers were in fact once the venerable clone troopers of the Grand Army of the Republic. I won't go into great detail on the origins of the clones, as I have already done a comprehensive guide on the Grand Army of the Republic in a past transmission, which a link to it will be coming up on your view screen now if you need a refresher. As part of the Sith master plan, the clones were used as a tool to catch the Jedi at unawares. After 3 years of gruesome fighting in the Clone Wars, the Jedi never saw their own troops turning on them, and they were gunned down. Order 66 didn't just take care of the Sith's Jedi problems on the front lines, as the newly anointed Darth Vader, once Anakin Skywalker, led a detachment of the clone 501st Legion into the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, where the rest of the Jedi, including the youngest of the younglings, were mercilessly slaughtered. This callous mission would become known as Operation Nightfall. In 19 BBY, shortly after the issuance of Order 66, Chancellor Palpatine declared himself Emperor, and that the Republic would be reorganized into an empire, with sweeping reforms to both civil and military institutions across the galaxy. Under these changes, the clone troopers of what was once the Grand Army of the Republic were now the stormtroopers of the newly created Stormtrooper Corps, while former judicials, Outland Regional Security Forces, and various volunteer groups were reorganized into the Imperial Army proper. Their combat role changed from general infantry to shock troops that specialized in rapid deployment, and worked in conjunction with the Imperial Army to capture key tactical aspects on the ground. While in space, they served as Marines, often the first to board enemy ships during boarding actions, and the first line of defense when their own ship was being boarded. Though the war was over, the clones' jobs were far from it, and now that they were elevated to the status of elite shock troops within the Empire's new military, they would be at the forefront of the Empire's earliest campaigns. To add to it, Order 66, however successful, failed to eliminate all of the Jedi, so when the clone stormtroopers weren't fighting separatist holdouts, reactivated droid armies, various insurgents, and pirates in the numerous campaigns that made up the reconquest of the Rim, they were hunting Jedi, oftentimes under the direct command of Darth Vader himself. For the next 7 standard years, the Stormtrooper Corps was comprised entirely of Jango Fett clones. That was until, in 12 BBY, the Kaminoan cloners who had supplied the clones to the Republic and the Empire had other ideas. Burnt by the Empire turning to faster and cheaper cloning options such as the Arcanians and Spartai cloning technologies, the Kaminoans bred their own clone army in secret and used it to rebel against the Empire. But their insurrection was quickly put down by the stormtroopers of the 501st Legion, with the help of Boba Fett. After the Clone Rebellion, the Empire sought to move away from using Fett clones, whose genetic material was degrading anyways years after Jango's death. So, they created clones from other templates, as well as began recruiting natural-born human men and women from loyal worlds, save for the 501st Legion, who remained mostly Fett clones up until the Battle of Hoth in 3 ABY. With new blood came new armor and equipment. The earliest Stormtroopers were still wearing their Phase 2 clone trooper armor they had worn at the end of the Clone Wars. However, as the months went on, they were issued new sets of armor. Unofficially dubbed Phase 3 armor, Stormtroopers in late 19, early 18 BBY wore what looked to be a fusion between Phase 2 clone trooper armor and modern Stormtrooper armor, though we have very little information about this armor set. Only hollows of one of the subsequent battles of Kashyyyk, where we can see the armor being worn, survive. Clearly, this armor was the bridge between the finalized armor design and its clone armor predecessors. By mid to late 18 BBY, we can see Stormtroopers finally wearing the version of Stormtrooper armor that we're familiar with, comprised of 18 pieces of energy-diffusing, impact-resistant plastoid encased around a one-piece body glove that provides insulation and compression to aid in triage to stem bleeding during sustained combat injuries. Inside the Stormtrooper's helmet, you'll find an inner liner of magnetic shielding, a filtration system to protect the trooper from chemical and biological attacks, polarized lenses with a heads-up display, and an IFF transponder, which helps the trooper identify friendlies versus hostiles, as well as keep in touch with his or her squad mates. An interesting fact about Stormtrooper helmets, these threat targeting features on the heads-up display only work when the designated trooper the helmet belongs to is wearing it. The heads-up display being deactivated very well could have contributed to the reason why Luke Skywalker had such a hard time seeing out of Trooper TK-421's helmet when wearing his armor on the first Death Star. Moving on to the torso section, the multi-segmented plastoid plates allow for greater range of movement, as well as the greatest protection from blasters and other energy weapons, and allows for energy to disperse across the surface. Environmental controls are also located here, which the trooper can adjust to his or her climate comfort. The arm segments of Stormtrooper armor are reinforced to aid in hand-to-hand combat, allowing glancing blows from vibroblades and blunt weapons without damaging the trooper's arms. The gloves can sometimes be modified to deliver electroshocks too. Lastly, Stormtrooper leg segments are interesting because they aren't identical, with the lower right segment containing the suit's power cells, while the lower left segment has a reinforced ridge to aid the trooper when firing from a kneeling position. It's a common misconception that Stormtrooper armor is completely useless, as we've seen the trope in the Holo films of Stormtroopers going down easily to one well-placed blaster shot. And while, yes, the armor won't protect the wearer from direct high-powered blaster shots, it does protect from glancing blows, shrapnel, and direct low-powered blaster shots that would be customary to most legal civilian weapons. Even if you aren't guaranteed survival, if the chances of survival are higher while wearing the armor, one would most likely choose the armor than not. It does possess a certain intimidation factor as well, and the standardized uniformity contributes to the myth of the unbeatable Imperial war machine. Not to mention, it instills a sense of camaraderie among the Stormtroopers of the Corps, and sets them apart from the personnel of the Imperial Army and Navy. Standard issue equipment for the common Imperial Stormtrooper include the Blastech E11 blaster carbine, a utility belt, as well as thermal detonators, which I will get into in a moment. Quick overview of the E11, it's a lightweight weapon with a folding stock, and a range of 300 meters. It has two settings, stun and kill, and can get off about 500 shots out of one power pack. Lastly, the optics can interface with a Stormtrooper's heads-up display. Though they aren't standard issue, Stormtroopers have been seen wielding other weapons, such as the DTL-19 heavy blaster rifle and the T-21 light repeating blaster, which are also Blastech specials. Many troopers have trained on the E-Web heavy repeating blaster as well, requiring a team of 3 to operate, but really their equipment depended on their specialization, which I will get into in a bit. Back to standard issue equipment, on the Stormtrooper's utility belt, you'll find a small C1 military comm link, a grappling hook, E11 blaster power packs and a clip to hang the blaster from, binder cuffs, survival kit with rations, flares, and a med pack, electronic lock scrambler, emergency air supply tank with up to 20 minutes of air, an encrypted telemetry transmitter, and one key-locked thermal detonator on their back. On the subject of that thermal detonator, if faced with the threat of capture, troopers will sometimes trigger their thermal detonator to avoid interrogation and take as many enemies down with them as possible, though it is preferred to lob them at the enemy combatants, obviously. Stormtrooper officers in the field can sometimes be identified by color-coded pauldrons on their shoulders, with white signifying sergeants and orange signifying any rank above sergeant. But, more often than not, officers will be displayed on a trooper's HUD, which makes sense considering we see the pauldron colors change in both variety and meanings over the years of the Empire's reign, as well as unit specializations, which can sometimes get confusing. While off the battlefield, Stormtrooper officers wore uniforms similar to the Imperial Navy officers, complete with double-breasted tunic, black boots, officer's kepi, code cylinders, and rank plaques. However, their uniforms are black rather than gray-green. In fact, in my previous transmission about the Imperial Navy, I mistook Commander Nahadonis Praji for an Imperial Navy Star Destroyer commander, and noted confusingly that his uniform was black rather than gray-green. This is because he was actually a Stormtrooper commander, and I wanted to take this moment to correct my error. Now that we have an idea of what equipment standard Stormtroopers took into battle, we can take a dive into some of the different trooper specializations and the configuration of their uniforms and equipment. Desert Stormtroopers, also known as Sand Troopers, are commonly deployed in arid environments, requiring advanced breathing filters in their helmets to protect them from harmful silicates. On their backs, they wear a cumbersome but necessary SD-48 survival backpack, which carries several liters of purified water and circulates cool water throughout the trooper's body glove for temperature regulation. The pack also has a functional evaporator to make more water as well as a collapsible shelter. These troopers also wear the rank pauldrons I discussed earlier. Cold Assault Stormtroopers, or more commonly known as Snow Troopers, are kitted out for Arctic environments, with heavy insulation underneath their armor plates, as well as a breather hood over their helmets to prevent ice buildup. Controls for heat regulation are located on the trooper's breastplate, and in their backpacks, they carry a portable heater, collapsible shelter, a homing beacon, comm unit, and flares. Scout Troopers wear lighter armor than most other Stormtrooper variants, as they're often behind enemy lines for reconnaissance and need to be able to move faster, as well as quickly mount and dismount their Aerotech 74Z speeder bikes. Their larger visors on their helmets allow for more tactical readouts to be displayed on their HUD, as well as terrain sensors for while traveling at blistering speeds on their speeder bikes, and can also function as macro binoculars. Standard Scouts usually only carry a small holdout blaster, as they aren't expected to get into combat situations, only reconnoiter. However, Scout sniper teams carry E11s as well as the E11S sniper rifle. Their survival packs contain a water purification kit, flares, grappling hook, camo shelter, comlink, and Arakid Industries R4 recon droid. For water worlds, the Empire has their own specialized troopers for that environment as well. Aquatic Assault Stormtroopers, or Sea Troopers, wear armor similar to the Scout Troopers. However, their foot segments are flippers for maneuvering underwater, and their helmets have breathing tubes connected to air tanks, with up to over an hour of air on their propulsion units. Using modified E11s capable of firing underwater as well as spear guns, Sea Troopers are often deployed from AT-AT swimmers, which they can return to recharge their air supply and then go back out into combat. Incinerator Troopers wear standard Stormtrooper armor with red markings and pauldrons, and are trained to wield the Oppressor flame projector and plasma rifles. These pyromaniacs have been used to clear enemy bunkers, as well as burn whole villages to the ground. Also armed with flamethrowers, Magma Troopers were deployed on volcanic planets like Mustafar and Sullust, and their otherwise standard-looking red Stormtrooper armor was actually extremely heat-resistant, reinforced with a material called Durvalex capable of withstanding temperatures of almost 2,000 degrees centigrade. Hazard Stormtroopers are cybernetically augmented, and wear fully sealed armor resistant to acidic, electromagnetic, biochemical, and other environmental threats. They are armed with concussion rifles and heavy repeating blasters. Similar to Hazard Troopers without the augmentation, Evo troopers also wear fully sealed armor, with breathing tubes connected to an apparatus on their backs that allows them to breathe on worlds hostile to humans. They are ideal for deployment against alien combatants on worlds like Doran and Skako. Radiation Zone Assault Troopers, or RAD Troopers, wear modified lead polymer plastoid armor that protects them from lethal Grade 5 radiation for several hours outside their radiation-sealed body gloves. Advanced breathing filters in their helmets keep out harmful radioactive particulates, as well as contain UV sensors and macro binoculars. Because of the volatility of blaster weapons and thermal detonators, RAD troopers used modified E11 carbines and concussion grenades that could still function in highly radioactive areas. Jump troopers, sometimes called sky troopers, are elite stormtroopers trained for rapid insertion via jetpack. Usually sporting either the AGP-400 jetpack or the JT-12 jetpack, jump troopers were often heavily armed, wielding anything from heavy blaster rifles to plasma disruptors, railguns, and flechette launchers. Anything that allows them to go in and do as much damage as possible and get out quickly. For swampy environments, wetland assault troopers or swamp troopers wear light camouflaged armor that helps keep out moisture and other bacterial threats native to many swamps. They can also operate underwater for a limited time. Now, for space troopers, there are two very different types with very different roles. The first being stormtroopers with attached breathing apparatuses that allow them to patrol in vacuum for extended periods of time, like the ones seen outside Docking Bay 327 on the first Death Star. The other, far cooler space trooper variant is the Zero-G Assault Stormtrooper, which are basically mechanical exosuits that the trooper steps into and operates. With its own propulsion system, Zero-G Space Trooper armor allows the trooper to fly up to enemy ships and, with laser cutters, rip open their hulls and board them. These troopers have been known to one-shot starfighters with their array of weaponry, including but not limited to blaster cannons, grenade launchers, and proton torpedoes. There are a bunch of other different trooper types, which, even in a comprehensive guide such as this one, I will no doubt miss. However, let's go over a few more trooper specializations and then move on, because we have a lot to cover. Some of the most impressive looking stormtroopers actually had rather boring roles, such as the Nova Guard. These black armored stormtroopers with their gold pinstriping were usually only posted ceremonially on historically significant worlds, such as the Emperor's birthplace on Naboo, and during celebrations, such as award ceremonies or New Year's Feet Week on Coruscant. Same goes for the Coruscant Guard, who, like their clone shock trooper predecessors, really only act as glorified law enforcement within Coruscant's government district, though their specialized armor does have some cool features, like extra padding for when potential riots get hand-to-hand, as well as built-in loudspeakers in their helmets for crowd control. They carry force pikes, taser staves, and riot rifles. Shadow Stormtroopers, on the other hand, are a different story, and I've covered them before in a previous transmission, but briefly. Their all-black armor is infused with a Stygian crystal polymer that not only allows them to not show up on sensor scans, but cloak as well, rendering them totally invisible. The Shadow Stormtroopers only serve Agent Blackhole, however, once head of Imperial intelligence, who became a warlord after the Emperor's death at Endor in 4 ABY. On the subject of special forces, throughout the Empire's history, we see two main commando units in the Stormtrooper Corps, the first being the Imperial Commandos. Imperial Commandos were leftover Republic Commandos from the Grand Army of the Republic's Special Forces Brigade. These commandos were absorbed into the 501st Legion and helped Vader hunt down Jedi during the Purge. However, we don't see these units by the time of the Galactic Civil War, so it's reasonable to assume they were disbanded after either most of the clones died from battlefield attrition or succumbed to their own accelerated aging, which was common in Camino-grown vet clones. The second one is the Storm Commandos. Created by Imperial Commander, later turned Rebel General Crix Madine, the Storm Commandos fulfilled the role left by the Imperial Commandos that was now increasingly needed to counter the Rebel Alliance's guerrilla tactics. The Storm Commandos wore similar armor to the Scout Troopers. However, like the Shadow Stormtroopers, it's black and made with a special polymer that made them invisible to sensors. Their training was far more extensive too, as all Storm Commandos were also trained pilots, with their own TIE variant, the TIE Hunter, which are carried by the Storm Commando escort carriers. Lastly, though it's not common knowledge, the Imperial Royal Guard are actually a special detachment of the Stormtrooper Corps. Stormtroopers who show great promise during training at the Empire's academies and fit a certain criteria are selected for additional training at the Royal Guard Academy on Yinchor, where those who survive the rigorous training go on to don the red robes, only after fighting for their lives in front of the Emperor himself. To maintain their combat effectiveness, Royal Guardsmen are often rotated into active combat zones, wearing crimson Stormtrooper armor that sets them apart from the common troopers. Before we move on to Stormtrooper training, an honorable mention to the Dark Troopers, which, though technically aren't Stormtroopers, would have been deployed in support of them, had the Dark Trooper project not been scrapped after Rebel Agent Kyle Katarn's sabotage. I've done a transmission on them before, but briefly, Dark Troopers were a series of Imperial battle droids developed by General Rom Mok after the destruction of the first Death Star, and came in 3 phases. The first 2 phases were entirely autonomous, however, Phase 3 Dark Troopers could be worn as an exosuit by Flesh and Blood troopers, kind of like the Space Troopers, though the unit more often than not operated on its own. Moving on to training and recruitment, in the case of non-clones, enlisted men and women had to meet a height requirement of 1.79 to 1.85 meters, and a weight range of 78 to 85 kilograms, with an overall body mass index rating of 22 × 5. They also had to be intelligent as well, meeting a tactical intelligence rating of 790 at the least. If you were accepted as a recruit into the Stormtrooper Corps, you were given an operating number, usually consisting of a 2-letter prefix followed by 3 or more numerals, and then shipped off to one of the many training facilities, such as the one on Karita. The Karita Academy trained both naval and ground military personnel, and the planet's higher-than-average gravity made it perfect for arduous training exercises. The merciless training regiment applied to the recruits caused many washouts, who either left training altogether or were referred to the Imperial Army or Navy, but those who did pass the rigorous standards had the honor of donning the white armor. Now, if you so happen to exceed the 790 tactical intelligence rating by an impressive margin while still meeting the physical requirements, or, more often than not, just had wealthy and influential relatives, you were more than likely referred to the Stormtrooper Officer Program, and attended the Cliffside Officer Academy, also on Karita. The curriculum for the Stormtrooper Officer Program included wilderness survival training, desert warfare simulations, underwater battle tactics, experimental weapons testing, flash memory instruction, military history, self-discipline through emotional suppression, and education on the principles of the New Order, no doubt sponsored by Compnor. When a Stormtrooper officer cadet neared the completion of his or her training, they were assigned their Omega exercise, which gave them temporary command of an actual Stormtrooper unit, and threw them into an active combat situation. Upon survival of their Omega exercise, so long as the mission success versus casualty rate and scoring were acceptable, they would pass and be permitted to graduate with their peers. Upon failing this exercise, however, flunked you out of the academy and landed you with the rest of the enlisted. Now onto organization. We can see that some streamlining had been done with the Stormtrooper Corps compared to the unit sizes within the previous Grand Army of the Republic, as they were notably smaller. The smallest unit size was a squad, numbering just 8 to 10 Stormtroopers, and was commanded by a sergeant. Squads were often split into 2 fire teams, and deployed in a staggered wedge formation, with each fire team leader at the head of each wedge. This allows for maximum firing range in all directions. The next size up was a platoon, consisting of 4 to 5 squads with 40 to 50 Stormtroopers in total, and was commanded by a lieutenant and his or her sergeant major. Stormtrooper companies consisted of 4 platoons, ranging from 128 to 200 Stormtroopers in total, and was commanded by a captain. Next, a battalion consisted of 4 companies, with a maximum of 800 Stormtroopers in total, and was commanded by a major. Battalions could potentially incorporate many different types of Stormtrooper specializations. Stormtrooper regiments consisted of 4 battalions, with a maximum of 3,200 Stormtroopers in total, and were commanded by a lieutenant colonel. Regiments were large enough to occupy a busy Class A planetary spaceport. And lastly, the largest unit denomination within the Stormtrooper Corps was the Legion, which consisted of 4 regiments, with a maximum of 12,800 Stormtroopers in total, and was commanded by a High Colonel, and at times a Stormtrooper Commander. It's interesting to note that the Stormtrooper Corps possessed no rear echelon personnel or staff officers to support the Corps' logistics, leading to rumors that the Stormtroopers foraged for their food and supplies. More than likely, though, they were probably supplied through Imperial Army and Imperial Navy logistical bodies, which makes sense considering the Stormtrooper Corps and the Imperial Army use a lot of the same weapons and equipment. As to how many Stormtroopers there were in total at the height of the Empire's power, it's unfortunately unknown, with none of my sources giving me an exact figure, while at least one source suggests that this is deliberate, and that Emperor Palpatine wanted to keep the illusion that his loyal Stormtroopers were limitless. More accurately, records probably got muddled and complicated by the subsequent Imperial Civil War after his death. In the quieter years between the reconquest of the Outer Rim and the rise of the Rebel Alliance, Stormtroopers were sent to problem areas all over the galaxy to put down local insurrections and enforce law and order in unruly sectors. By 2 BBY, with the founding of the Alliance to Restore the Republic, better known as the Rebel Alliance, the Empire's problems were becoming more organized, and the Stormtroopers were sent in to counter the Rebel threat, participating in early battles like Raltir, Katata, and Toprawa, where the plans for the first Death Star were stolen. It was Vader's Elite 501st Stormtroopers that boarded Princess Leia's CR-90 Corvette, the Tantive 4, after Toprawa, but she was able to get the Death Star plans off of the ship, and subsequent searches on Tatooine's surface by Sand Trooper teams yielded nothing. The Alliance was able to successfully analyze the plans for the first Death Star, and found a weakness before it arrived in the Yavin system, and the heroic actions of both Red and Gold Squadron resulted in its destruction, taking with it 25,984 Stormtroopers. Stormtroopers spearheaded numerous retaliatory strikes against the Rebel Alliance in the aftermath of the Battle of Yavin, assaulting the Rebel HQ on the moon itself and taking part in later engagements during the search for the Rebel fleet. Not every Stormtrooper was a fanatical foot soldier to the regime, as shortly after the Battle of Yavin, a group of 5 Stormtroopers went rogue after refusing to take part in a massacre on the planet Teardrop, and killing an ISB major investigating them for insubordination. They called themselves the Hand of Judgment and went vigilante, eventually coming into contact with an Emperor's hand named Mara Jade and helping her put down an overambitious Imperial governor on Chelkanwa. Eventually, a new Alliance base was established on the ice planet Hoth, and in 3 ABY, Imperial probes located the base, and Vader's Death Squadron moved in, dispatching the Imperial Snowtrooper unit Blizzard Force, working in conjunction with a detachment of the 501st Legion to overrun the Rebels' defenses. At the Battle of Kothless, Stormtroopers stormed the beachhead in a feint to protect the top-secret computer core containing the plans to a second Death Star. In reality, though, the Rebels were meant to get away with the computer core so the Emperor could lure them into a trap at Endor. Stormtroopers also saw action during the occupation of Bespin and other engagements leading up to the fateful Battle of Endor in 4 ABY, where a legion of Stormtroopers cooperated with a joint Imperial Army and Navy task force called Tempest Force to guard the shield generator of the moon protecting the Death Star 2. However, they were distracted long enough by an uprising of the native Ewoks for a team of Rebel commandos to go in and blow up the shield generator. The aftermath of the Battle of Endor was a time of great upheaval for the Empire, as many Grand Moffs, and Admirals fancied themselves as warlords and consolidated their forces, carving out their own miniature empires out of their holdings. This would at times pit Stormtrooper against Stormtrooper, culminating in the First Imperial Civil War. However, the Empire would experience brief moments of reunification, such as under Grand Admiral Thrawn in 9 ABY, where, utilizing captured Spartai cylinders from the Emperor's storehouse on Wayland, he bred a new generation of clone stormtroopers for his war against the New Republic, but luckily he wasn't able to create very many clones before his betrayal at the Battle of Bilbringi brought the warlords back into contention with one another. The Empire was reunified again under the reign of the reborn Emperor Palpatine, who used his recalled fleets and troops to run the New Republic out of the core worlds. However, he was defeated for a final time by the Skywalkers and Solos, and the Empire would resort back to warlordism. That was until 12 ABY, when Admiral Dalla reunited the Empire a final time by gathering all the remaining warlords into one room and executing them simultaneously. Stormtroopers continued to serve the newly reunified Imperial remnant through the many campaigns leading up to the Pelion-Gavarsum Peace Treaty in 19 ABY, the horrific Yuuzhan Vong War in 25 ABY, and the Second Galactic Civil War in 40 ABY. Sometime after 45 ABY, the Imperial remnant went through another set of reforms. With the ascension of Emperor Jagged Fel and Empress Jaina Solo Fel to the no longer vacant Imperial throne, the entire Imperial military was reorganized. The Stormtrooper Corps, as a separate military organization, was disbanded and absorbed into the Imperial Army. Stormtroopers were no longer the elite shock troops of the Empire, and now served as standard infantry once more. To add to it, aliens were now allowed to serve in the Imperial military, and with them, special sets of Stormtrooper armor were created to fit their uniquely non-human physiology. Though the Corps itself was now gone, a relic of a bygone era, Stormtroopers continued to serve the new Fel dynasty for centuries, and even through a second Imperial Civil War and an incursion of Sith that tore the Empire apart, they continued to serve the Empire with the same fervor that had been instilled in their predecessors.
This ends my findings on the Imperial Stormtrooper Corps. If you have any suggestions for future transmissions, don't be afraid to drop a comment. Special thanks to my Ori-Ramaka tier patrons, Batterai, Bowfix, Cherryman, Hawk2274, Ian Waller, Jaleel, John Hollingsworth, Cal Scarata, Kyankir, Marcus Dial, Matt Patton, Bayo4, the Commando Droid, Scruffy Looking Nerf Herder, Weston Simmons, Wirefox Terrier, Zim the Despot, and Zexend. If you'd like to support this channel, please visit my Patreon to find out how. Or, if you want to make a one-time donation, buy me a calf on Ko-Fi. Links are in the description. In the meantime, keep your comm channels open for future transmissions, and don't forget to subscribe. Tad Larkin, out.